The Big Ten finally revamped the Big Ten schedule for 2024 and beyond with the addition of Oregon and Washington. The schedule, it's not what it looked like initially for UCLA. In my perspective, it actually moves up the timeline for how good UCLA should be, and that is next year. Why? We'll tell you on Locked On UCLA.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making the show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. So like, comment, subscribe, review, download the episodes. Thanks for your support if you're an everydayer. I've been talking about UCLA football and their matchup against Washington State. We've been talking a little bit of UCLA hoops. A lot of schedule releases for this season, for next season, for multiple sports. How does that affect the Bruins in any aspect of any sport? We'll talk about that all throughout this episode. So let's get started with the Big Ten schedule release. Initially, UCLA saw what was their 2024 and 2025 opponents, where you could see somebody within the first 2 years, and it would continue to rotate. You wouldn't go at least 2 cycles without playing an opponent. Now with 18 teams, no divisions, Oregon and Washington joining the Big Ten from the Pac-12, right as the Pac-12 disintegrated, the Big Ten officials had to get to reorganizing that schedule they had released, I believe, at some point earlier during the summer in 2023. What I noticed, in my mind, UCLA now with their 2024 schedule should be much better than they should be in 2025 based on how they switched the schedule. This was UCLA's initial schedule in 2024. This is what it looked like prior to Oregon and Washington being added to the conference. You've got at LSU and at Hawaii and against Fresno State at home. Those are your non-conference games. Those will not change, and that is not in the correct order, but you got at LSU, at Hawaii, and Fresno State at home. Your road games in Big Ten play are at Nebraska, at Penn State, at Rutgers, and at Washington. Your home games include Indiana, Iowa, Minnesota, Oregon, and USC. So what I did right now was actually say the current Big Ten schedule. That's the current Big Ten schedule. So my bad. We'll pause right there. So if you're just listening, that was the current Big Ten schedule. That's going to be in play next year. You play Nebraska, you play Penn State, Rutgers, and Washington. So those are your road games in 2024. You've got Indiana, Iowa, Minnesota, Oregon, USC. So the first year, think the travel should be a little shorter. You've got Nebraska, who's, I believe, the closest Big Ten partner. You've got Washington, who is the closest Pac-12 Big Ten partner other than Oregon on the road, excluding USC. So you get your 3 Pac-12 teams in one season for UCLA in 2024. As you look at their schedule, like, oh, we get to play Oregon, SC, and Washington. Keep that camaraderie going for another year before they somewhat split off. Who you don't hear in that schedule, Ohio State. You don't hear Michigan. Let's go back to what the original schedule is. I'll read it correctly now because I wrote it wrong in my notes. The original schedule had UCLA playing at Indiana, at Iowa. It's one thing to host Iowa, but playing at Iowa is a different venue. At Michigan and still at Rutgers. So the Rutgers game did not change. That's the only game on the original schedule that did not change going across the country. UCLA would have hosted Minnesota, hosted Nebraska, hosted Northwestern, and played Ohio State at home. So think about that. The Bruins avoid both Michigan and Ohio State in their first year in the Big Ten. Initially, the Bruins had to play them both, and then they would have to go and play in 2025. Mind you, they also avoid Wisconsin in this first year. All teams that could be very good. I know Wisconsin did lose to Wazoo this year, but still, those are teams that are generally pretty solid in Big Ten play, in my mind. You think of the big dogs, Michigan, Ohio State, prior to all these teams coming in. Those are the 2 schools you think of. You got a sophomore year, Dante Moore, and now the expectations are going to get raised to level because if you can get through that non-conference slate semi-solidly, 2-1, 3-0, this is a Big Ten schedule for UCLA where they can succeed and compete in the expanded playoff with there being 12 teams. So this is a unique schedule for UCLA to even compete to be in the playoff next season if they can retain some defensives, if they can keep the defense going next year. I know there's guys who are going to go to the NFL draft and all that, but if they can bring new players to replenish the talent that will be lost, you maybe keep some offensive weapons back for another year, including Dante Moore. That is a schedule for success. Initially, I was halting, saying, all right, you got to go to Michigan, play at Iowa. You've got to play Ohio State at home, USC. You just never know. Now, the schedule is like this. At Washington, there's no Michael Penix Jr. Oregon at home, Bo Nix is done. USC, we expect, I know there's all those rumors being floated around of Caleb Williams staying an extra year if he doesn't like the number one team in the NFL, the worst team in the NFL during the NFL draft. But ideally, you avoid Michigan, you avoid Ohio State and Wisconsin. You play Washington on the road with no Michael Penix. You play Oregon at home with no Bo Nix, and USC possibly with no Caleb Williams. Look at that dream schedule. Now, I know you go to USC. They go to LSU and at Hawaii and have some unique road games next season. But the Bruins are now designed based on the schedule and the redistribution of games to be a playoff team potentially. I know there's a lot of personnel changes that will happen, coaching changes, so much stuff that's going to change in the transfer portal window that just got shrunk from 60 to 45 days. But I think with this schedule, we should be frustrated if UCLA is clearly not competing for a playoff in 2024. Now, that's a lot to put on the sophomore quarterback's shoulders, not knowing who he's going to be throwing to or handing the ball off to, if they can even improve the offensive line, if the defense will be good next year. A lot of question marks moving forward for UCLA in 2024. In 2025, I know the schedule was released all the way out to 2028. We're not going to go that far. We have so many episodes we can talk about that. You've got Indiana on the road, Michigan State, Northwestern, Ohio State at SC. That's a little bit more of a gauntlet. That'll be 2 years removed, theoretically, for USC from Caleb Williams. They'll have somebody in the wings. I do know who they have behind Caleb Williams is supposed to be pretty good. Still, it'll be a true freshman quarterback coming to the Rose Bowl as opposed to playing Caleb Williams as a senior, if it all plays out that way. But in 2025, at Ohio State, at USC, you host Washington, Penn State, Nebraska, Maryland. So initially, in the first year, you're going to go to the big house and try and smack around Michigan in order to get some revenge for them canceling this series. Now, with these first 2 years of schedules being released, you don't play in Illinois, they don't play in Wisconsin, and they don't play Michigan in the first 2 years. They only get Michigan State once in the first 2 seasons, and Ohio State. Think about that. So all those cool games the Bruins were going to have with the 16-team Big Ten, and they had this whole idea of the Flex Protect Plus. The Flex Protect Plus, you're going to say that 10 times fast and probably not get it. UCLA is not going to have as many marquee games necessarily, right? Indiana, Iowa, Minnesota isn't going to be barking up the tree. It's going to be the Pac-12 schools, now Big Ten schools, Oregon and SC, that will probably draw the moneymakers. And Iowa will probably travel. We'll see how Minnesota travels in 2024. This is a schedule designed in 2024 UCLA to make the playoff. 25, a bit tougher. You get SC on the road. You get Ohio State on the road. You get to go to East Lansing. And yet you still miss Michigan, Wisconsin, and Illinois. Not that Illinois can be a super football power, but you're missing a lot of schools till 2-3 years down the line, which wasn't initially what was supposed to happen with this Big Ten schedule Protect Plus with no divisions. And then you had some protected rivalries. It's UCLA SC, the protected rivalry. Oregon, Washington are the holdover protected rivalries in that. So for UCLA, we're going to take a sneak peek down a few years. UCLA does play either Oregon or Washington every year through 2028. So you're going to get at least 2 of those 3 teams UCLA is going to play. You're going to play not like Oregon, Washington, USC in the first year of the Big Ten. You're only going to get generally 2 of those 3 games, which means it's going to alternate between Oregon and Washington based off the series year in or year 2 and year out for those 2 schools. So UCLA always plays SC and will rotate between Oregon and Washington outside of playing in 2024, where the Bruins go to Washington and host Oregon and USC. So remember, 2024, the timeline has jumped. Chip Kelly's make it or break it year is next year. Some say it's this season and fire him and go get someone better or worse. I know there's been a lot of debate in the comments. I've thought initially it was hold off to 2025 when Dante Moore is theoretically a junior. Next year is the make it or break it year. This is the year where UCLA football can put themselves on a map nationally with all the extra primetime games, a star quarterback and another year under his belt, a defensive coordinator who we hope stays at UCLA and continues to grow the UCLA defense year by year, with him getting his recruiting footprint a hold on this SoCal, any recruiting in 2024. Lots of good things. So 2024, UCLA, I think, should be a playoff team based on schedule alone, who they miss, and potentially compete for a Big Ten championship simply because they don't play some of the better programs you would think in the next season. Got me excited and fired up. What should get you fired up? The last time UCLA Washington State played in 2019, it was a fantastic game. I already told you guys in a most recent Locked On UCLA episode, it's Throwback Thursday for this episode, which means we're going to go back in detail and talk about UCLA versus Wazoo in 2019. All those crazy stats, numbers that you forgot about, the crazy 32-point comeback. What did Wazoo choke with? I'll tell you all that and more coming up next on Locked On UCLA. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, and style, eBay Motors has got you covered. Over 120 million plus parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. With all the parts you need and the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Cruising on to the second segment of Locked On UCLA, it's Throwback Thursday. Depending on when you're listening to us, you don't have to wait for a Thursday if you're watching it. It doesn't matter when, because it's already happened. A great, glorious day in September 2019, one of the best college football games ever played, one of the biggest and best comebacks ever for UCLA and in NCAA history occurred September, 22nd, 2019, when the Bruins found a way to come from behind. Actually, it was September 21st, 2019, as I'm reading this ESPN AP article. September 21st, 2019, the Bruins came back and beat the Washington State Cougars down 32 points with less than 4 minutes to go in the third quarter, 67-63. The implications. This was Chip Kelly's second season as UCLA head coach. The Bruins had started 0-3 against a ranked top 20 Washington State Cougars team, coached by then the late and great Mike Leach. They were 3-0 in the Pac-12 opener for both teams, where the Cougars fell a little short and blew a 32-point lead. Their quarterback, Anthony Gordon, threw for 9 touchdowns. They accounted for over 700 yards, and yet they couldn't hold on to the lead. How could a game when your quarterback throws a program record 9 touchdowns with Gardner Minshew, who was in attendance in that game on the sideline, who had thrown the school record 7 touchdowns prior to Gordon, came in and watched the Cougars blow this epic game? It was UCLA's first win that season en route to their 4-8 campaign. They won 3 games in the middle of the season, but prior to this win at Wazoo, UCLA hadn't had much offense to show for it. They had lost at Cincinnati in late August, lost to San Diego State in first week of September, and lost to Oklahoma, then led by Jalen Hurts, 48-14. The Bruins hadn't put up more than 14 points in a single game that season, and Washington State had just drubbed opponents in beatdowns against New Mexico State, Northern Colorado, and held on to beat Houston in Houston, Texas, 31-24, just a little over a week prior to the UCLA matchup. So let's dive into the numbers of some of the crazy, funny statistics between the Bruins and the Cougars, because, hey, there's a lot of NFL talent and big-time players on the field. Of course, DTR just made his first career NFL start, relieving Deshaun Watson. DTR threw for over 500 yards, 5 touchdowns, and threw 1 pick. He accounted for 7 touchdowns individually. So of UCLA's 9 touchdowns scored, 7 of them by the offense, it was DTR who threw for 5 of them, rushed for 2 with 57 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. UCLA only turned it over once. So how did Washington State lose this game if their quarterback throws for 570 yards, 9 touchdowns, averages nearly 9.3 yards per completion or per pass, and threw it 61 times? His team rushed for 150 yards. Max Borghi rushed for 123 yards. It's because the Cougars turned it over 6 times. Gordon threw 2 picks. The Cougars absurdly fumbled it 4 times, all recovered by UCLA. You had Josh Woods recovering it twice. You had Elijah Gates, who recovered it a couple of times. The Bruins, with a Josh Woods pick and a Darnay Holmes pick, a big game for UCLA to knock off the Cougars. Plus, you had a Demetric Felton 100-yard return touchdown and a Kyle Phillips 69-yard return touchdown that gave the Bruins a late lead in the fourth quarter before they eventually took the lead with about a minute plus left and then forced another turnover to hold on. A wild game, 2 return touchdowns, 6 turnovers forced, 67 points put up, and a wild, crazy game for UCLA. Wazoo in this game, it was just one of 4 times this season, in the 2019 season, where the Cougars put up 50-plus points in a game. And they also put up 49 in a win against Stanford. In a game that featured almost 60, 70-plus combined points between 2 teams, it was one of 3 one-score losses that the Cougars lost, where they lost to UCLA 67-63, lost at Arizona State 38-34, lost at Oregon 37-35, and ended up holding on to beat Oregon State later that year in late November, 54-53 against the Beavers in 2019 to finish to a tune of 6-7, 5-1 at home. Their only loss coming to UCLA, where that could have maybe changed the fortunes of their season. In the end, the Cougars were never the same after that UCLA loss, where the Bruins, despite finishing 4-8, they had a 3-game winning streak in the middle of the season, kind of stumbled to the finish in what we thought would be a good 2020 season, turned into a 21-22 campaign with some success, and gave UCLA 2 of the greatest epic comeback victories in NCAA history, just 2 years after they did so against Texas A&M down 34 points. So imagine all these crazy games. The Bruins had what, a 21-point comeback against Northwestern in a bowl game, some epic comebacks, but having 2 30-plus point comebacks, one at home, one on the road, in epic opportunities, one with Josh Rosen, one with DTR. One wonders what's going to be Dante Moore's shining moment. For DTR, he had many awesome moments, but I think this one is probably one of the best. It doesn't stand out in the season, that doesn't stand out, right? But when you throw for 500 yards, count for 7 touchdowns, help lead your team back down 32 points. This was the last time these 2 teams played. There hasn't been anything since these 2 teams have played where we've been dying to see what happened. UCLA was left for dead in this game, down 32 with under 4 minutes to play in the third quarter. Normally the game's over. There's no reason for this game to have been close as it was. Instead, the Bruins came back, showed some heart, and said, hey, we're going to fight for their first win that season. That shows a lot of a team that was growing and building under then second-year head coach Chip Kelly to make an outstanding comeback. It was a fun time, fun game. And you got Greg Dulcich, Josh Kelly, you got Kyle Phillips, Chase Cota, DTR, Felton. You've got so many different guys from this game that are playing either pro football, NFL football somewhere, that have continued their career just from playing in this game alone. Just what a wild, wacky game. What a wild game in all of it. And yet the Bruins came away with a win. Another wild stat, you had Aesop Winston Jr. for Washington State, who had 4 receiving touchdowns. Demetric Felton had 250 total all-purpose yards with 3 touchdowns, 2 receiving, 1 return touchdown. Chase Cota, 147 yards with a receiving touchdown. And then you had Kyle Phillips, who had the big touchdown on the punt return that eventually gave UCLA one of their 2 late leads that they eventually held on to late in the fourth quarter, 67-63. And if you remember, what was that last touchdown? What was that last big play? A Demetric Felton touchdown pass from DTR 15 yards out to give the Bruins the lead with 1:07 left before the Bruins eventually held on to beat the Cougars. I'm not saying this game between the Bruins and Cougars in the Rose Bowl will be that epic. Although the last time they played in the Rose Bowl. The Cougars did score in the final minutes, less than a minute, to take the lead when they only needed a field goal. So these teams have played some fun late-minute opportunities. We'll see how it plays out between Cam Ward, a dynamic quarterback, and Dante Moore, a young, rising freshman, in now what's going to be his fourth game in his third consecutive start. Everything that will be super fun about this game might not be 67-63, but we hope that Jake Dickert, Chip Kelly, can battle it out between what might be the final time these two schools play in a long time for a classic battle. September 21st, 2019, a game to be remembered for sure. We'll talk about more UCLA hoops and their finalized schedule next on Locked On UCLA. So as we wrap up Locked On UCLA, just an episode prior to our prediction keys to the game episode between the Bruins and the Cougars, UCLA men's hoops also released their finalized schedule in 23-24 because the Pac-12 finally was able to get their schedule finalized for the conference schedule. We knew all the opponents, we knew the weeks, but now we know the days and some of the times for UCLA in 23-24. But if you've already forgotten what the schedule looks like for the Bruins heading out to Pauley Pavilion, that they're no longer going to Maui, they're going to Honolulu to play the Maui Jim Maui Invitational. They've got their three biggest games of the season arguably baked into the final part of the schedule, where you've got Arizona and USC at the end, and you've got three straight crazy road games, Arizona State, Arizona at SC in late January. Let's get to the schedule right now. The schedule starts November 6th, 8:30 tip-off between the Bruins and St. Francis out of Pennsylvania. You got Lafayette November 10th and Long Island University November 15th, as the Bruins hopefully should cakewalk their way to 3-0. If not, then there might be some trouble, and you'll be hearing about it from moi. Then the Bruins go to the Maui Jim Maui Invitational November 20th through the 22nd. It is in the Stan Sheriff Center, home to the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors in Honolulu, because the Lahaina Civic Center will not be available. So the Bruins take on Marquette. You either play Kansas or Chaminade, and then in the third game, it's either deep in the lower bracket game or in the championship, and what should be a rowdy, crazy atmosphere in the Stan Sheriff Center. This will be UCLA's first test. The big highlight from the middle November part of the schedule, the Maui Jim Maui Invitational, which we hope can provide a lot of relief, a lot of funds for all the wildfires that happened earlier this year in Hawaii. And for UCLA, it's a big building block and a message for their team. What will we look like? Are we this good this early and everybody's got the X on UCLA? Or is it a learning moment? People forget about the Bruins and then they build and build into something special, somewhat similar to what the Bruins did last year when they went to Vegas, took 2 L's, went on a crazy long winning streak, got healthier, got better, and the Bruins then were nearly unbeatable and a national championship contender until the late injuries. So remember, Marquette, either Kansas or Chaminade, and then you get to play whoever's left. And what they have deemed, I'm not saying this is what the tournament's trying to pump up, and I might agree, the most competitive bracket in the tournament's history, even though it includes the non-Division I Chaminade. So this is what's supposed to be a very entertaining tournament, any game that UCLA plays. They return home from the Maui Jim Maui. You host UC Riverside to end November. And then December, a couple of 3 big-time matchups, some against some future Big Ten rivals. First, you do go to Villanova on the road December 9th. That's their first game in December. The Bruins have a long break early December. They play at the Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia against Villanova. That's a big test. That's their first true road test of the season. Then the next weekend, they go back to the East Coast. They play in Atlanta at the State Farm Arena, where I thought they might be playing UNC. We've discussed this since they've released the CBS Sports Classic. The Bruins will be facing Ohio State on December 16th at noon in what is a big game, and we'll see how the Buckeyes look this year, and could be another big 1-2 punch. Nova, Ohio State, back-to-back East Coast trips. How do the Bruins fare with the long travel, as that could be a miniature preparation for what life looks like in Big Ten in the future, right? Back-to-back East Coast trips. I'm not sure the Big Ten's going to try and do the Bruins like that, except UCLA can prepare for it like this. You do get the likes of CSUN as one of your last home games prior to the new year in Pac-12 play, and then your last non-conference game. I think a banger. Last year, the Bruins took down Maryland in an absolute domination Maryland went on and had a nice run at the end of the season. The Bruins host the Terrapins December 22nd, 6 p.m., as UCLA looks to take down the University of Maryland. Pac-12 play actually starts the end of December. And for the second consecutive year, the Bruins will be on the road. They play at Oregon and at Oregon State and at Oregon in their final matchup, going to Gill Coliseum as conference members. The Bruins then start the new year off Wednesday, Saturday, Stanford Cal. Their little standalone road game is at Utah on a Thursday, January 11th. Your standalone home game during the middle of January is versus Washington. So remember, they don't get to play Washington State twice, and they don't get to play Colorado twice in a year where the Buffaloes might actually be a sneaky competitive team. I think the Bruins dodged a little bit of a tough matchup in that regard. End of January, it's all tough. You got Arizona State, Arizona, SC in a row, all on the road, when you get to see what USC might be probably at their full potential. Arizona, where they weren't supposed to host UCLA, and then that changed because the Pac-12 was able to get schools to change their mind. The Bruins get to go back to the McHale Center one final time as a conference rivalry with the Wildcats in basketball. Should be one of the rowdier atmospheres, if not the craziest. The Bruins play all year long until they go to the Galen Center the next week. February, Bruins get the Oregon schools, the Bay Area schools. The middle of February, February 15th, because remember, 2024, it's 29 days in February. It's the leap year. Leap day will happen in February. The Bruins get to play in the middle of February. Colorado, February 15th, a sneaky home game. That could be a game the Buffaloes circle on their calendar, potentially as one to improve their seed or get to the NCAA tournament as a team that needs a big signature road win. UCLA gets Colorado, Utah, USC. That's a sneaky good homestand middle to end of February. And a rarity, UCLA plays on February 29th at Washington at Alaska Airlines Arena at Heck Edmondson Pavilion for what will be not their last time going to play the Huskies, because they get to play them in the next coming seasons as Big Ten members. March 2nd, the last ever matchup for the Bruins in Beasley Coliseum as conference members against the Cougars. And then the season ends as follows. Arizona State at home, where you play Arizona March 7th, and then you play Arizona State March 9th, an 8 p.m. Fox Sports 1 game, while the Bruins will be on ESPN to play the Wildcats. It won't be a Saturday game like it was last year in the last day of the regular season. It'll be somewhat of a standalone, gets its own prime time development between the Bruins and the Cats. It might actually be a 5:30, 6 o'clock tip earlier than we expect to get a little more East Coast love since the game's on a Thursday night. That game does not have a time, March 7th. One of the biggest games the Bruins get to play this season, their final regular season matchup ever against the Wildcats in hoops. So a fun schedule. There's 3 different segments of the schedule, right? There's the Maui Jim Maui, the first testing for UCLA hoops. That's where UCLA gets their first. Are they legit? Do they have to build? Immediately in December, you get the Nova, Ohio State, Maryland, 3 out of 4 game stretch. Have they learned? Is this where they take their first stumbles, first true road games of sorts, another neutral site game? What have they learned? How does the Pauley Pavilion crowd act when Maryland comes to town? Then late January, at ASU, at Arizona, at USC. That's an absolutely stacked part of the schedule. We'll see what the Bruins are made of. Those are their first Pac-12 tests of the season. Not that Utah or Oregon and all these other teams, it's not that they won't be true crazy games, but when you get so many in a row, that's where it's going to get really tough for UCLA. And then again, at the near end of February, Colorado, Utah, SC, a couple of those games between a couple of what we believe to be Pac-12 contenders, Colorado and SC. We'll see what Utah looks like this season. That's a big part of UCLA's home schedule. And if for some reason the Bruins need it, and if Arizona is playing as well as we probably expect them to play, the Bruins have one last big game opportunity on national television before the final Pac-12 tournament to get the eyes on them to the NCAA tournament committee. Hey, look at us. We're playing Arizona. Do we need to get your eyes on us again? Just like they failed to do a year ago? We'll see. But that is what's going to be a fun schedule. So you got 3 different segments where the Bruins get non-conference part 1, non-conference part 2, and then you've got the conference schedule, which can be a unique, fun battle for the Bruins and everybody they play this year. With Mick Cronin, there's 7 freshmen, 8 newcomers, so many guys in different roles. We're excited for this season to start. From this posting of the podcast, it'll be almost a month away till opening night between the Bruins and St. Francis, and we cannot wait, which is why you should download, like, comment, subscribe to Locked On UCLA. Thanks for your support. I'm Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer signing off. If you're an everydayer, come back to the next Locked On UCLA episode. We predict, and I tell you what I think is going to happen in the UCLA Wazoo game. Will they upset the 16th ranked team that they are favored to win to beat the Cougars? We'll talk about that next episode on Locked On UCLA. Hands up, Bruins fans. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA fight, fight, fights. This has been Locked On UCLA. Go Bruins.